Have you ever looked back on a moment when you were kind, truly kind, and walked away, wondering why it left you feeling small instead of valued? Maybe you offered help before anyone asked. Maybe you stayed quiet to keep the peace. Maybe you gave someone your time, your energy, even a piece of your heart, only to be brushed aside, forgotten, or taken advantage of. If that resonates with you, you're not alone. Many of us, especially as we grow older, carry with us a lifetime of giving. We've been taught that kindness is a virtue, that being good means always doing the right thing, always showing up, always saying yes. But somewhere along the way, we start to notice something unsettling. The more we give, the less we seem to matter. The more we care, the more invisible we feel. And we begin to wonder, is something wrong with the world or with us? This is not about blaming others or changing who you are. It's about seeing clearly what has been hidden, even from ourselves. I believe that every human being has a shadow, a hidden part of the psyche that contains everything we've ignored, denied, or pushed away. And sometimes, our own kindness, when not balanced with awareness and boundaries, becomes a doorway for others to project their own shadows onto us. In this conversation, we're going to explore 5 deep reasons why your kindness might be leading people to disrespect you, and how you can protect your peace, reclaim your worth, and continue to be the beautiful, generous soul that you are, without being walked on. Let's begin right at the heart of it. You see, when kindness has no limits, it starts to look like weakness. That's hard to admit, especially when you've spent a lifetime trying to be a good person. But the truth is, human beings are wired to test boundaries, not always out of malice, but out of instinct. It's how we learn what's safe, what's possible, and how far we can go. So, if you're always available, if you always say yes, even when you're tired, if you put others' needs ahead of your own day after day, without ever drawing a line, some people will start to treat you not as a strong, kind-hearted individual, but as someone who can be used. And the worst part? They may not even realize they're doing it. There's a term for this in psychology, the benevolence exploitation effect. It's what happens when others unconsciously take advantage of someone's kindness simply because that kindness seems endless. Like a well that never dries up. But we both know, no well is truly infinite. When you don't express your limits, people assume you don't have any. They begin to expect your energy, your time, your emotional labor, without offering anything in return. Not out of cruelty necessarily, but because you've taught them that this is how the relationship works. And slowly, quietly, your value in their eyes begins to fade. Not because you've become less worthy, but because what is always there, always giving, starts to blend into the background. Here's the good news. You don't have to stop being kind. You don't have to become someone else. But you do need to protect the sacred part of yourself that gives. That means saying no when you're depleted. That means drawing a quiet line around your energy and letting others know, kindly but clearly, where it stops. No one can have a clear conscience without first knowing their own shadow. And I believe that part of our shadow, as kind-hearted people, is the fear of saying no. The fear that we'll disappoint someone, that we'll seem selfish, that we'll lose love. But what we really lose when we never say no is ourselves. Now let's sit with something even more subtle, but just as powerful. Your kindness may actually be stirring discomfort in others, not because of anything wrong with you, but because of what it reflects back to them. There are people in this world who struggle to accept kindness, especially when it's genuine. Why? Because it shines a light on the places inside them that can't give without expecting something in return. Your generosity becomes a mirror, showing them their own mistrust, their own hidden wounds, their own inability to be soft. For some, that reflection is too much to bear. It reminds them that they've spent years building walls of cynicism, walls of suspicion, walls of cold independence. And then you come along with your open hands and warm heart, and suddenly their defenses are exposed. They may respond by pulling away, mocking your kindness, or even treating you with contempt, not because you did anything wrong, but because you reminded them of what they're afraid to feel. It's painful, isn't it, to offer someone your best and be met with distance or disdain. But it's not about you. It's about their unhealed stories. What we reject in ourselves, we often project onto others. So, if someone has rejected trust, softness, or vulnerability in their own life, they may project those shadows onto you. They may accuse you of being naive, or fake, or too nice. But what they're really doing is defending themselves from the possibility that kindness could be real, and that they've been missing it. You can't fix that for them. You can't convince them of your sincerity. But you can choose to keep your heart open, while also keeping your eyes open. When someone rejects your kindness, it does not mean you are unworthy of love. It simply means they haven't yet made peace with the love inside themselves. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a choice. You can keep giving the way you always have and keep feeling drained, confused, maybe even resentful. Or you can begin to give with awareness, with intention, with balance. You can be kind and still say no. You can be generous and still protect your time. You can be loving and still expect respect. Because your kindness is not the problem. It's your invisibility, your silence, your willingness to disappear in service of others. That's what needs to change. And it can. Let's stay with this moment a little longer. Because what we're talking about isn't just behavior, it's deeply emotional. It's the quiet ache you feel when you've done everything right, only to be ignored. It's the sting of realizing that your love, your help, your patience has become expected rather than appreciated. That ache is real, and it matters. There's another reason your kindness might be leading people to disrespect you, and this one runs through the very fabric of how society teaches us to behave. We live in a world where strength is often mistaken for hardness, and where competition is rewarded far more loudly than compassion. The workplace, the media, even social circles, they all tend to glorify power, status, and self-interest. In that kind of culture, someone who leads with kindness can seem out of place. Maybe you've felt that. Maybe you've sat in a meeting or a family gathering and watched others dominate the conversation while you waited your turn, only to find there wasn't one. Maybe your soft voice, your thoughtful tone, your respectful way of listening were overlooked in a world that's grown too loud to hear them. You weren't weak. You were different. But being different in a world that values toughness over tenderness often brings resistance. People who thrive on control or self-promotion may look at you and think, "Why are they so gentle? What's their angle?" Or worse, they may dismiss you as someone who just doesn't know how to play the game. And yet, what they don't see, what they can't see, is that your kindness is not ignorance. It's a conscious choice, a courageous one. Choosing not to play the ego game doesn't mean you don't understand it. It means you've outgrown it. But many people haven't. And when you don't play along, when you choose connection over competition, depth over dominance, they may respond with sarcasm, exclusion, or subtle dismissal. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're disrupting the norm. You've become a quiet reminder that there's another way to live. And for some, that's uncomfortable. This is where a deeper understanding of human nature becomes so powerful. As the saying goes, what you resist persists. In other words, the parts of ourselves we avoid, the vulnerability, the need for love, the pain of being human, don't go away. They just go underground. And when someone like you enters the picture with your warmth and sincerity, you stir those buried parts in others. You make them feel something they weren't ready to feel. So they resist you or dismiss you, not because your kindness is weak, but because it's disruptive. And you may start to wonder if you should change, if you should become colder, sharper, more like them. But let me gently remind you, the answer isn't to become someone you're not. The answer is to stand more deeply in who you are, with eyes open and heart intact. Still, there's another shadow that follows the kind-hearted, and it's this. Generosity is often mistaken as a willingness to sacrifice endlessly. Think about it. When you're always the one who shows up, who listens, who gives without being asked, people start to believe that you don't need anything in return. You become the strong one, the dependable one, the one who never complains. And over time, your needs begin to fade into the background, not just for others, but sometimes even for yourself. You might catch yourself thinking, "I'll rest later," or "It's okay, they need it more than I do." Or maybe you've even stopped asking yourself what you need altogether. That's how invisible we become to others and to ourselves when we take on the silent role of caretaker. And yet, this role isn't one you necessarily chose. It's one that kindness slowly walked you into. Because you care, because you love, because you want to be there for the people around you. But the more you become the one who's always there, the more people assume you'll always be there. And just like that, your presence becomes an expectation, not a gift. This creates a painful loop. The more you give, the less others consider your needs. And the less you ask for, the more they assume you have nothing to ask for. Over time, your kindness becomes something people feel entitled to, rather than something they appreciate. And that is not your fault, but it is something you can change. You see, true generosity doesn't mean disappearing. It doesn't mean carrying the world on your shoulders while pretending you're fine. It means giving from a full heart, not an empty one. And in order to give from a full heart, you must take time to refill it. That might look like saying, "I can't talk right now, I need some quiet time." Or, "I'd love to help, but I'm already at my limit this week." Or even just pausing, breathing, and checking in with yourself before you say yes. These aren't selfish acts. They are respectful ones. Respect for your body, your spirit, your worth. And here's something beautiful to remember. When you model self-respect, others learn how to respect you too. When you speak your needs with grace and firmness, you show others that kindness doesn't mean erasing yourself. It means honoring yourself. And when they see that, they begin to treat your time and energy with more care. Of course, not everyone will. Some will continue to take. Some will resist your boundaries. And that's when you'll need to remember that protecting your peace is not an act of war. It is an act of deep love for yourself and for the life you still have ahead of you. Because your time matters. Your voice matters. Your presence matters. Not just for what it gives, but for what it is. Let's take a breath here. Because what we're really uncovering isn't just why others might not respect your kindness. It's how you can begin to change that, without losing what's most beautiful about you. By now, you might be seeing just how deeply these patterns run. They're not just about people taking advantage. They're about how your goodness is seen, misunderstood, or even dismissed. Not because it lacks value, but because it's been given too freely, too constantly, and too quietly. And that brings us to something that often goes unnoticed until it's already taken a toll. When your kindness is always available, it begins to lose its impact. Just like anything in life that's unlimited. Water from a tap, light from a bulb, even the phone that always rings. People begin to tune it out. They stop noticing. And what was once a generous offering becomes background noise. Think about someone who's always there for everyone. The one who never misses a birthday, always says yes to helping out, always listens to everyone else's problems. That person becomes reliable, predictable, necessary, yes, but not always appreciated. Not because they aren't worthy, but because they've made themselves constantly accessible. When something is always there, we stop thinking about what it takes to keep it there. And this, right here, is where your emotional exhaustion might be coming from. You may be giving so much of yourself, day in, day out, that you've forgotten what it feels like to be truly received, to be met with equal care, to feel that your kindness has weight, because it does. Kindness has weight. It takes energy, presence, emotion, time. And yet, when it's offered endlessly, it begins to feel weightless in the eyes of others. Just something they can reach for without realizing what it costs you to give it. I believe that imbalance between the light and shadow in us leads to suffering. If the light is your goodness, your giving nature, then the shadow is the part of you that wants to rest. That needs to feel seen. That yearns to say no without guilt. And when you ignore that part, your kindness becomes a burden, not a gift. You start to feel invisible, used, maybe even resentful. This resentment doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you've crossed your own emotional limits without realizing it. It means the scale has tipped too far into self-sacrifice. And the longer you stay there, the heavier it becomes, until even the smallest request from someone else feels like too much. That's the danger of unmeasured kindness. It can turn into quiet suffering. But there's a way out. And it starts with remembering this truth. Kindness doesn't have to be constant to be real. In fact, it becomes more powerful when it's offered with choice, with intention, and with boundaries. Imagine how much more your time would mean to someone if they knew you had carefully chosen to give it. How much more deeply your words would be heard if they weren't always available. How much more your support would be appreciated if people knew you give it not because you have to, but because you choose to. That's not withholding love. That's honoring love. That's giving it from a place of fullness, not obligation. It's the difference between lighting a candle because you want to warm the room and leaving it burning until there's nothing left but wax and wick. There is so much strength in choosing how and when you give. You're not turning your back on generosity. You're bringing wisdom to it. You're letting it breathe. You're keeping it sacred. So how do you begin to restore that balance? Start by checking in with yourself before you say yes. Not just, can I do this? But do I want to? Do I have the space for this? What will this cost me emotionally? If the answer brings a sense of peace, then go ahead. But if the answer stirs guilt, fatigue, or frustration, that's your shadow asking to be seen. Practice saying no, not as a rejection, but as a redirection of your energy towards something that restores you. Try. I'd love to, but I need some quiet time today. Or, I care about you, but I can't help right now. Those are not selfish words. They are words of self-awareness. And don't be surprised if some people react badly when you begin to set boundaries. Remember, they've grown used to a version of you that said yes without hesitation. When you change that dynamic, it can rattle their expectations. But that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're doing something different, something healthier. Let them adjust. Some won't. That's okay too. What matters is that you stay true to yourself. That you learn to protect your peace with the same compassion you've given so freely to others. That you understand your kindness is not measured by how much you give away, but by how well you care for the soul it comes from. Because the world doesn't need your constant availability. It needs your presence, your clarity, your wisdom, your joy. And those things flourish when they are nurtured, not drained. So if you've ever wondered why your kindness didn't lead to the respect you expected, maybe the question isn't, well, why don't they see me? Maybe it's, how can I begin to see myself more clearly? And from that place of strength, of self-awareness, of deep inner knowing, you'll begin to attract the kind of respect that doesn't just notice your kindness, but honors it. Sometimes the hardest thing to admit is that we've played a role in how others treat us. Not because we're to blame, but because we've allowed patterns to go unchecked for far too long. Whoa. And if you're someone who leads with kindness, chances are you've spent much of your life hoping people would see your heart and respond with gratitude, care, and respect. But the truth is, not everyone will. And that doesn't make your kindness any less beautiful. It simply means it's time to reclaim the part of you that knows your worth, even when others forget it. So let's bring this full circle. Your kindness has always been your gift. It's what makes you pause when others rush. It's why you check in when no one else does. It's the reason people feel safe around you, even if they don't know how to say it. But kindness, without boundaries, becomes invisible. It blends into the background. It becomes something people assume will always be there, like a porch light left on, never noticed until it goes out. And that's what you must protect now, not just your energy, but your light. Your light matters. It always has. When we ignore the parts of ourselves we fear, our needs, our limits, our assertiveness, they don't disappear. They live in our shadow. And the shadow doesn't go away just because we pretend it isn't there. It waits. It shows up in moments of exhaustion, in silent resentment, in the feeling that no one really sees you. But once you begin to recognize your own shadow, everything changes. You begin to stand taller. You stop over-explaining. You say no without guilt. You stop needing to prove your goodness because you already know it's there. And when that shift happens, when your kindness is no longer a mask, but a conscious, chosen way of being, it gains power, presence, weight. People feel it. And those who once overlooked you start to realize they can't take you for granted anymore. Not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. You don't have to become cold. You don't have to harden your heart. But you do have to respect it. You have to stop apologizing for your boundaries. Stop shrinking to make others comfortable. Stop waiting for the world to treat you the way you deserve. Start treating yourself that way first. Because the most powerful kindness is not the kind that burns itself out trying to light the way for everyone else. It's the kind that knows when to shine, when to rest, and when to retreat and protect its own flame. If no one has told you this lately, let me say it now. Your kindness is not your weakness. It's your strength. And when paired with self-awareness, with healthy boundaries, and with the courage to be seen fully, light and shadow, it becomes something others can't help but respect. So take a moment. Breathe. Think of all the ways you've given and given and given. And now, just for today, ask yourself, what do I need? What would it look like if I offered that same care, that same tenderness to myself? That's not self-indulgence. That's balance. You've spent so much of your life looking out for others. Maybe now it's time to turn some of that loving gaze inward. Not to become selfish, but to become whole. And if there's anything I hope you take away from this time we've shared, it's this. The world needs your kindness. But it needs it from a place of strength, not depletion. From choice, not obligation. From presence, not performance. So go forward with your heart open, but guarded wisely. Give generously, but only when it feels true. And walk through this life knowing that your kindness, when honored first by you, will naturally invite the right kind of respect from others. If any part of this spoke to you, I'd love to hear your story. Have you ever felt taken for granted because of your kindness? Have you found ways to set boundaries without giving up who you are? Leave a comment below and share your wisdom. You never know who might need to hear it. And if this video helped you in any way, please consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who might be carrying the same silent struggle. You are not alone. You are not invisible. And you are far more powerful than you realize. Here's to living your truth. loving without losing yourself, and being respected not in spite of your kindness, but because of it. We'll see you next time. Until then, take gentle care of yourself.